Lend your ears, lend your hands, lend your movement, anything you can. Come to teach, come to be taught, come in the likeness and the image of God. 'Cause you can be like that, with all that humbleness and all that.
If you think Max swore a bit, then get ready for Gunham. Gunham's got a great sense of humour. He's a quarter Irish, I think he is, so he even introduces himself as a leprechaun. All right, so if you guys want to give a warm welcome to Gunham Buddy.
G'day everyone. Like Mark says, I spent quite a few years as a fisherman and doing other things, and if I let fly the odd word, I apologise. It's par for the course. Some of what I'm going to say may offend some people, and as I said in Sydney, I apologise for the offence, but not for what's said. Because if you can't handle the truth, stiff shit. Everybody knows at the moment there's a thing called an act of recognition that's being proposed by the governments of Australia, state and federal. It all sounds on the surface as though it's a good thing. It was like the 1967 referendum that was supposed to be for the benefit of the tribal people.
Sorry, dude.
Or what the Crown would have you believe are the Aboriginal people. Ultimately, or in actual fact, the 1967 referendum was nothing more than smoke and mirrors to prepare Australians for what's proposed now in relation to the Act of Recognition. I'll go through a bit of legislation and stuff in relation to the tribes and where we stand. Before I do that though, I will say that so far as we're concerned, the legislation is entirely immaterial to us. We don't give two shits what the Crown says or thinks. Not particularly concerned about their legislation other than the fact they continue to use their little blue-coated thug bully boys to railroad our people and commit ethnic cleansing on behalf of this thing called the Crown Corporation. The Crown knows that the only way that it can take lawful possession, or legal possession, not lawful, but legal possession of our lands, is they have to first break our blood ties to it. And by blood ties, I mean the fact that our people have been on this country for that long now that our DNA is the same as the ground. Okay? The fact is that the whole process since the Crown arrived here, and you've got to remember it wasn't settlers for the UK Parliament. It was a trade trip and a trade settlement that was established at Sydney on behalf of the East India Trading Company. Had nothing to do with the government or the people of England, although we can blame them if we want. It's all good. What happened was that when Arthur Phillip left to come to Sydney, or to Australia, his instructions were that he was not to interfere with the Aboriginal people, and that they were only to take lands that were necessary for their survival, and then only after appropriate compensation had been paid to the owners. That never occurred. That was in 1780. The fact is that the Crown claims that they took, or the governments here, acting on behalf of the Crown, claim that when the British arrived, they took sovereignty over the whole continent. Apart from being absurd, it's just not correct. The fact is that when the British arrived on the soil here, let's use a hypothetical. Let's say, for example, that they did take sovereignty over the Darug tribe lands in and around Sydney Basin. The Darug was a completely different, separate, sovereign tribe and nation to all of the other separate, sovereign tribal nations on the continent. To suggest that when they took possession of one portion of land and they assumed sovereignty over all the other nations would be akin to suggesting that when Hitler stormed into Poland, as we're led to believe at the beginning of the Second World War, that he took sovereignty over continental Europe. Just doesn't add up. And we've got to remember that the same laws, the same international law effectively applies now. It's just under a different name. Back then it was called the Law of Nations. Now it's called international law, which is effectively the same thing, just said differently. The facts that prove, not suggest, but prove the Crown or the UK Parliament never took sovereignty over our lands started within 8 years of settlement. The evidence is written into, for example, the Judge Advocate General of the First Fleet, Captain David Collins, in his diary in 1796 stated very clearly that he'd had a conversation with Bennelong, and Bennelong informed him how he still owned his land under hereditary title that had been passed down to him from his father, and that when he died he was going to pass the land on to his best mate, a bloke by the name of Bygone. It's all recorded. There's no question that it's 1796 the Darug people still maintain sovereignty over their land. So the bullshit by the Crown that they claimed that they took sovereignty in 1780 when they arrived here, or 1778, they didn't. They just didn't do it. In 1835 through to 1840, there was a commission of inquiry in the House of Commons, and it was called an inquiry into Aboriginal people wherever British settlements were made. In that inquiry, there's a report that's freely available. If anyone wants it, we can organise to get it to you by email. This report states a number of things, but what it made very, very clear was the fact that the British, at that point in time, had not taken sovereignty nor ownership over the lands. They admitted that they did not have the right to enter into the lands of their neighbours and usurp their sovereignty and take ownership of their lands. They acknowledged that the land was owned by the tribes. They acknowledged this without question. So until 1840, we can see that the British admitted and accepted they did not hold sovereignty. But what happened was that, for example, in 1840, 1841, here, we had cases like the Crown versus Tommy. And these cases were heard by so-called judges here who disobeyed their own law and tried Aboriginal people for various crimes under British law, which they had been told they could not do. So what they set about to do was to set precedent law in place so that they could continue to do that ad hoc, ad infinitum. The one thing they didn't do, and I'll harp on this a bit, but I'll make it very clear towards the end, they did not take ownership over the land or the people. Okay? They did not. I'm probably going to piss a few people off when I start getting into land title in a little while, but if you hear me through to the end on that one, there is a solution. There were a number of these cases that went on through to about 1875. In 1875, on the 2nd of August, Queen Victoria, actually, in 1844, Queen Victoria created an ordering council. And an ordering council is an amendment or a statute that is created by the monarch that cannot be repealed by anyone but that monarch. If the monarch of the United Kingdom Parliament that creates a particular ordering council does not amend or repeal it, it cannot be amended nor repealed, and it's locked into law. In 1844, Queen Victoria made an ordering council that stated that the settlers were not allowed to allow the tribal peoples to be the authors of unintentional injury to themselves, and they were not to buy lands off the tribes if the purchase or the removal of the land from the tribe was going to cause the tribe any inconvenience or hardship. In 1875, Queen Victoria created another ordering council where she amended the Pacific Island Protection Acts on the 2nd of August 1875. Section 6 of that amendment was very clear, and it stated that the British settlers and their courts were not allowed to exercise the jurisdiction or the laws of the Crown or the UK Parliament against the tribal peoples. It says that they were allowed to establish courts of justice, that they were allowed to establish admiralty courts, that they were allowed to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things, but they could not slate any of that against our people. Section 7 of the same amendment states under the title of rights of the tribes that they were not allowed to extend or construe, in other words, bullshit, to extend sovereignty or jurisdiction over the tribes, and that such sovereignty was to remain with the chiefs and the rulers of the peoples of the tribes here and in the Pacific Islands. I've got one academic who is arguing with me about the application of the Pacific Island Protection Act on this continent, and it has to do with the line that was drawn down the western side of the Pacific, but that particular section is voided by the nature of the Crown. A very long story, and you really don't want to hear it, but effectively it comes down to what is a civilised society. And it cannot be argued that a civilised society is one that tortures, slaughters, rapes, pillages people, buries kids up to their necks in the sand and kicks their heads off. That is not a civilised society. not by anyone's rule. But that's another story. There are a set of rules that govern the operation of the United Kingdom's parliaments, including those here. And those rules are called Halsbury's Rules. They've been amended over the time, but in relation to the period of time that the Pacific Island Protection Act was created and amended, and that the Constitution of what people call the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia was created, is edition 3 of Halsbury's Rules. Now, if you go to page 337, paragraph 559, part 12 and 12.1, it states very, very clearly that all parliaments are supreme in their sovereignty and their authority. And it states very, very clearly that the British Parliament was not allowed to usurp the sovereignty of the Maoris assembled at Waitangi, and that the Maori were not allowed to usurp the sovereignty of the UK Parliament and its monarch. And the reason they used the Maori as an example was just as an example. It applied universally. And all of these things lock in together. An interesting principle of law is that if one statement is out of step with the law, it will not fit. But as you can see, all of these circumstances fit. Then what happened was that in 1900, there was a thing called 63 and 64 Victoria, Chapter 12, an Act to Constitute the Commonwealth of Australia, 1900 UK was created. That Act was created by the application of the royal assent of the monarch of the United Kingdom Parliament, and so therefore applies only to British subjects. The tribal people at the time of Federation, and up until now, remain in our original capacity of the sovereigns of this land. We are not British subjects. Okay, it's as simple as that. Some people would say, oh, well, you're an Australian citizen. Well, okay, fine, I'm an Australian citizen, but I also reserve my right as I would if I were in someone else's country. If I went to America and became an American citizen, I would also be able to hold dual citizenship. On this land, I hold dual citizenship, for want of a better way of saying it. You might want to say I'm an Australian citizen. Okay, I'll cop that, so long as you understand that I'm also a tribal sovereign on my land. I'm not subject to the Crown's law. I refuse to be told by the Crown's agents what to do. They've had a good shot at that. They haven't got very far. I'm sure they'll have another shot, and they'll probably get just as far. But when the Constitution was created, it contained two very, very important sections. Well, for us anyway. The first section was section 51.26 that stated that the Commonwealth and therefore the states could not create laws for people of the Aboriginal race. The second section was section 127 that stated that they were not allowed to count us as part of the population of their states or the Commonwealth or the territories. It actually states the Commonwealth or any part thereof. Now in 1967, we got the first part of this smoke and mirrors that has culminated in this. What happened in 1967 was that the British subjects who are living as guests on tribal lands here decided they would amend their foundation document, or foundation administrative document, the Constitution, or what they call the Constitution, and they would repeal the whole of section 127, and that they would repeal a section of 51.26, and that was the section that said people of the Aboriginal race. Pardon me. The problem with that is this. Both of those statements were negative averments. The reason they were included in the Constitution is because they had to comply with both Halsbury's Rules as well as the Pacific Island Protection Act. Because the subsequent parliaments in England couldn't derogate from or take away from the Pacific Island Protection Acts and the amendments, which were an order in council, they had to stand. So they had to include these two sections in the Pacific Island Protection Act, in the Constitution. In 1967, the British subjects, as I said, decided to amend their constitution and remove those two sections, or part of section 51.26 and all of 127. The problem with that was that by removing the negative averment, they have claimed that that gave them a right to apply a positive averment. It did not, because the positive was never positively stated. Okay? Now, what happened since then, and if people who understand trust law and the issue of 30 and 15 and 45 would understand that it was, and if most people that may remember, was that this referendum was supposed to take place in late 2012, which is 45 years from 1967. In 1967, they set the stage for trying to suggest that they had a right to include us in their constitution. which they don't. The whole process of the act of recognition is not to recognise, it is to bind at law. I don't know about how many people out there, how many people have actually been arrested by the police and got bail? Mate, I could nearly own the place. No, it's not that bad, not that bad. When you get self-bail, or there's two types of bail you can get. You can either get surety bail, where someone puts up cash for you, or you can get what's called self-recognizance. Now, a recognizance at law is a contract. When you get self-recognizance, it's a contract between yourself and the magistrate, and you agree to do or not to do certain things for fear of a penalty. Okay? Now, just when I talk about words, I don't know what people know, so I'll say what I have to say. When I use certain words, I use them in their legal context. Now, a lot of people think that words are words and that's the end of it, but my favourite way of explaining that words aren't words is this. Everybody knows what the word fixture means, don't you? Well, at least you think you do. The word fixture, if you're talking to a cricketer, is a game or a match. If you talk to a plumber, it's a tap. If you talk to a real estate agent, it's something that's attached to the ground. And if you talk to a judge, it's a hearing. Okay? So when we talk about things that have to do with the legal realm, some people sort of jump on my head because they say, oh, you're being too legalistic. Oh, okay, fine. Now, if you want to talk about cars, we'll talk about cars. But if you want to talk about the law, we'll talk about the law and we'll use the appropriate legal terms. Most people would know about the term understand. It doesn't mean to comprehend in a court. It means to stand under or admit to or accept. So with this term recognizance, when they claim that they want to enter a recognizance with us, it's not because they want to make us feel all warm and fuzzy and recognise the blackfellas in the Constitution. Because I'll tell you now, if it was going to benefit the blackfellas, it wouldn't be happening. You've only got to look at the other scams they've pulled with us called native title, land councils, all this sort of stuff. I won't go into land councils because it'd take too long, but just a quick one on native title. Pardon me. John Howard played a pretty smooth smoke and mirrors game in the early 90s or from 96 onwards with native title. And he tried to say that, oh gee, if the blackfellas get native title, I'll come and take your farm. Nothing could be further from the truth, because the only beneficiary from native title is the Crown, and I'll explain why. In order to apply for native title, you have to admit on the application form that you are a traditional owner. Now, most people would assume that the word traditional means customary or from old time. But the word traditional at law comes from the Latin traditio, which means someone who sold their land to someone else. Traditio is the process of transfer of title or ownership, hence the word trade, hence the phrase trade and commerce, because if it wasn't for the issue of trade relating to the exchange of title to land or any corporeal asset, there'd be no need for the term trade in the term trade and commerce. Commerce refers to the exchange of monies for goods or monies for monies. Trade refers to exchange of land title, etc. So in order to claim native title, you have to admit you've sold your land to someone. Obviously, if you're asking the Crown for some native title, you've sold it to the Crown. So you sign your native title forms and you accept that you're a native traditional owner. At law, the word native comes from the Latin nativus, which means someone born into the condition of servitude or slavery. So a native is a slave. Hence the use of the term nations and United Nations. Okay? I was actually invited in 2012, July 16 and 17, to address the UN in Geneva, which we did, and we upset a number of people, particularly those baboons, and I used the term accurately, the baboons from the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, because anybody who knows what the legal term Congress means, it actually means a collection of baboons. And it's interesting to note that Congress is the opposite to progress. So if you're ever going to go and protest something, be careful. Go and contest it. But anyway, this whole process of native title, in order to gain native title, you have to fill out an application form. Point Q on that form states that from the time the form is signed, the Crown then owns all the mineral resources under the ground. So if they owned it before, why does it have to be signed over? And the interesting thing is with native title is that the whole process is overseen and tied together through an agreement called an Indigenous Land Use Agreement. The thing being that if it was Indigenous, if it was Crown land, it would most likely be called a Crown Land Use Agreement. So the whole purpose of native title wasn't to steal the farm. The whole purpose of native title was to give the farm to the Crown. If you live on a farm, you live in a house block in town, go and talk to your local tribe, do a treaty with your local tribe and get title from them. Because the Crown doesn't give you title. When you buy land, or when you get conned into believing you buy land, what you do is you buy a thing called a lot in a DP. The term lot means location of title. That's why it's written in capital letters. It's an acronym. It means location of title. You buy the location of title in a deposited plan. If that screen was a deposited plan, and that circle, if that circle was your lot, you would own that mark on that map, which is why you get a certificate of title that refers to property, not land, because the property is the map. Okay? The Crown doesn't like the fact that we're exposing this stuff because the Crown's trying to figure out how they're going to try and con the blackfellas into signing the land over. And now that we've been going around for the last quite a number of years now and bringing all the mobs up to speed on the meanings of the words, most of them aren't participating in native title, oddly enough. How did I get sideways on a native title from where I was going? Fuck, I don't know. There's a number of key factors to this issue of land. If you want to secure your land, go and talk to your local tribe, do a treaty with your local tribe, and you can hold your land under their authority or buy it from them. We've gone so far as up in what the Crown calls northern New South Wales. We had some people that came from Germany quite a few years ago. They bought land up in the Northern Rivers. And one thing led to another, and they came to me one day and they said, listen, we want to sit with the elders, we want to discuss something, so we organised a meeting. And what these people did was that they bought their land from the tribe, and the tribe did a treaty with them and gave them title over that land, absolute title. These people have had the police come to their front gate, and they've just said, well, see this treaty here? Here's a copy of it, take it, give it to your legal people, come back when you think you can get around it. And I think it was about 4 years or 5 years ago, and they've never been back. The courts don't like when this happens. The banks don't like it when it happens, because the fact is, as we said in the Supreme Court in New South Wales on the 20th of February 2012, we had a matter before the court where a particular elderly couple had a $1.7 million mortgage. They went before the court and they told the court that as far as they were concerned, they had treated with their local tribe, they had a title from the tribe, and if the bank wanted to exercise its lien over the certificate of title and the property attached thereto, they could go up to the Lands Department and get a copy of the map and take it. Alternatively, what they could do, they could jump on a boat or a plane and they could fly to London and they could go into the courts over there and they could sue the Crown for misrepresentation of an interest in the land. All right? It's really very simple. It's taken about 20 odd years of learning and research to get to this point. I was fortunate that my mum started all my dad's Golgotha, but I've got German on mum's side, and my grandfather and my grandmother on grandmother on my dad's side's Irish. So I ended up with fair skin, which got me into places that I wouldn't have got into, and certainly made me privy to conversations I wouldn't have been privy to had I had dark skin. And I just sat there and I learnt and listened, and I picked up a lot from some of these people that I was associating with, until I was approached one day and I was asked, Mark, have you got Aboriginal blood in you? And I said, well, yeah, does it matter? And 15 minutes later I was put out of this particular office, which required access to the offices through Australian Protective Services, and it was a fairly high office in this land. And I was told that I wasn't welcome back anymore. And all I said was, well, that's all well and good, because I've learned enough to do the damage I want to do. And we're going to take this country back off the Crown for all of the people. John Howard was very deceitful and very misrepresentative when he said the blackfellas will come for your farm. We don't want your farm. We already own it. What we're saying is we want to share it with you. This land is our land, and I respect what Max said earlier about ownership. We used to fight over our lands. Anybody who's been to Lennox Head Beach would know that there's a rock wall on the end of 7 Mile Beach. There's a rock wall that goes inland. That was a boundary line. Anybody who knows anything about tribal law, for example, would know that wherever a river divided two tribes or two nations, what would happen is, if you wanted to go across, what you do is you come to the boundary, you light a fire, someone from the other tribe would come, and if it was appropriate, you'd be allowed onto their land. The reason there are separate tribes is because we did have separate lands, and we do consider ourselves to be the owners of them, as much as anyone else. Custodians? Yep, for sure. But also the owners, okay? And quite frankly, it's an irresponsible owner that isn't a custodian. And there's no exclusion there. There's nothing that says you can't be a custodian and an owner. Our position is that we want the truth to be told. We firmly believe that part of the problem with this planet is the fact that the truth isn't being told. People who know about frequencies and vibrations, a lie has a vibration. And when that lie is out of step with everything else that's on the planet, there's disharmony. And that's why the planet's going the way it is, because effectively life on the planet at this point in time is based upon a huge lie, mostly propagated and generated by the Crown Corporation from the City of London, which, by the way, is owned by the Khazarian Jews. But that's another story, and Max touched on that earlier. I'll have to put these on because I can't see. I can, but not short distance. Can we go to the next section on this, AB? When we look at the word recognition, we've always thought that the word recognise just means to visualise or see something and accept it as being what it is. That's all well and good in the street. But when we're talking about something with legal ramifications like amending a constitution, we need to take on board the legal meaning of the word. On the day that they were discussing the Act of Recognition Bill in the Federal Parliament, what myself and a few of our elders and law people did was we went and served documents into the Parliament. And at the end of this, I'll read the preamble to the document that we served. But the document that we served was a declaration of nationhood and self-determination. That document has been sent to the UN. It's been accepted by them in accordance with what we told them 12 months before. A lot of people probably would not know that there is in fact a resolution from the United Nations. It's Resolution 262525 from the 24th of October 1970. And it states, amongst other things, that if we as a people tell the Crown to decolonise our lands, they must decolonise. We're not sure, we're not 100% across all these legal terms that are used, but most of our people feel that recognition in a constitution is not decolonisation. And the reason that we want the Crown to decolonise is because we're sick to the back teeth of the bullshit that's been going on for the last 220, 230 years. We're sick of people living on our lands being lied to by a system of governance that isn't there for the people. Our people used to sit in circle, okay? And the interesting thing about sitting in a circle is that you can see everyone else in that circle. All of our law, all our business was done in that circle. And you couldn't hide. You couldn't get up and leave the chamber when something was being debated that you didn't want to be associated with, but you wanted to let it slide anyway. Our law people are held to the law. The whole purpose of our law, as we see it, is to make sure that everyone is treated equally. Pardon me, and that justice is dispensed as quickly as possible. Our law might be a bit barbaric to some people, but as far as we're concerned, if a pedophile is proven to be a pedophile and he gets a spear in the leg, it's not so barbaric. Me personally, tie them to a tree about 8 foot from a bull ant's nest and cut their legs with a razor blade, and then have a corroboree around them. That's how I'd like to see it happen. I've got kids and grandkids, and anyone comes near my family, I'll tell you what, you don't touch kids. You just don't do it. But as you see, every time they use this term R, for example, R versus the defendant, the reason they chose to use the R for recognition and the recognition campaign is not coincidental. The whole purpose, the Crown uses symbolism in everything they do. Have a look at all of their buildings. You'll see they've got all their coats of arms. They've got everything that they can be recognised by splattered all over the place. The reason they use the R is for a very good reason. It represents them. And the R represents us being bound to them. And when we say that we don't want to be bound to the Commonwealth of Australia, we're not saying we don't want to have anything to do with the people. We're saying we don't want to have anything to do with them. Pretty much like you guys. Recognise. At law, recognise means to try, to examine in order to determine the truth of a matter, but also to enter into a recognizance. A recognizance is an obligation entered into before a court or magistrate, duly authorised for that purpose, whereby the recogniser acknowledges that he will do some act required by law which is specified therein. The act of recognising is performed by the recogniser's assenting to the words of the magistrate and acknowledging himself to be indebted to a certain party in a specific amount to be paid if he fails to perform the requisite act. For example, if we refuse to get a driver's licence to traverse our tribal lands, we agree to be booked for driving without a licence. Very simple. The whole recognition scam is nothing more than just a scam. Some of the pertinent questions that need to be asked that we haven't been able to ask are these. Are the tribal peoples of this continent being asked to recognise the authority of Regina over them? Once the so-called constitutional recognition is complete, do the tribal peoples become subjects of the Crown or the Queen completely? Is the federal parliament attempting to correct the mistakes of Cook and his successors in order to finally and legally subjugate the tribes and usurp our sovereignty? Why were the tribal people removed from parliament simply for declaring their position in respect of constitutional recognition and inclusion without equal and transparent consideration of both sides of the argument? And as you can see from this picture here, this is where we served the documents into the parliament. What we did was we complied with their requirement of their parliamentary process, which is the Bill of Rights 1688, that says if you're going to contest something that the parliament is doing, you need to do it when it's being done. So on the 13th of February last year, when they were discussing the act of recognition, what we did was we went into the parliament, we served them, you can see the document flying there, we served them our declaration of nationhood and self-determination. The reason we did it on that day was to make sure that everything we did complied with their laws within their building. It was quite interesting, as a matter of fact, that there were film crews from all over the planet there that day, and there is no question that the planet knows that those documents were served, which is why we did it. We also played their game with symbolism and numbers, and the document was actually served into the Parliament at 3 p.m. on the 13th of the 2nd, 2013, which is significant from a numbers point of view. We also need to ask the question, why wasn't the Crown's Parliament, or why won't the Crown's Parliament allow the full and proper exposure of both the pros and the cons of this argument? We have one of our elders, as a matter of fact, the gentleman, I won't call him a gentleman, the man in the red shirt there is a senior Ramanjari lawman. He was invited to attend the South Australian Parliament on the day, I think it was the 4th of March last year, when they were discussing the state's recognition bill. When they were discussing it, he stood up and he said, hang on, you guys don't have the right to discuss this until you come and sit with us and ask us if we want to be recognised or enter a recognizance. There was a bit of a disturbance in the Parliament. He was asked to leave the chamber. He left the chamber. When he went downstairs, there was 3 senators that were standing with him and the usher of the Black Rod, and the police entered the Parliament House with their guns and their batons and all their thuggery equipment, and they arrested him after they speared him into the ground. The problem they face, though, is that carrying their weapons into the Parliament is a breach, or is actually a contempt of Parliament. There's also the fact that there were video cameras that recorded what happened that they don't know about. There's also the fact that 2 of those cameras have a voice recording on them that demonstrate that the police said, we're going to, quote, go in there and drag him out of there, which displayed an intent to commit an assault, not to act reasonably and under the full strength of the law. We're in court on that on Tuesday. Last Thursday they wrote to us and the prosecutors wanted to withdraw the case, withdraw all charges, and we've said no, the matter is seized by the court. We'll be turning up on Tuesday. If you don't want to lead any evidence and we can run the case and be found not guilty, then that's how it'll be done, but there will be no withdrawing of the charges, because once we prove that he was not guilty of what they have claimed, we are then going after the police. And I mean, and by going after the police, I mean we're going to go after them. Jerry's forte at law, he spent 36 years at the bar specialising in governance, fraud and prosecuting police. So they've now done their due diligence and found out who it is that's representing Kano Walker. And from what I understand, they're not so sure that they're going to get up on their charges. We also have, by the way, senators and other people that were in the parliament at the time that are coming to testify on Kano's behalf. When the police had a bit of a squeeze at our witness list, they've realised that they're not in a really good position. But the fact is we've been through the first mentions, 2 mentions on the case. The matter's set down for trial, it's seized by the court, we're going to go to trial, and then when that's all over, we're going to give them a taste of their own medicine. Some of the stuff that Jerry would have been speaking on this afternoon, but I'll cover later, we're actually going to go after them for abuse of public office, which most people probably wouldn't realise, but that carries a maximum penalty of life imprisonment. And it's one of the little tools in a little toolbox that we got that when you walk into court and you open it and you pull it out and put it on the table, it's amazing. It's amazing to watch the police and the prosecutors squirm the way they do. I'll get through this recognition stuff and get on to some more interesting stuff. This next slide covers a lot about where the R comes from, what it means. By entering into recognizance, you submit to the terms of the contract, in this case called the Constitution. We don't want to submit to the terms of the Constitution. If the British didn't want to give us the courtesy of allowing us to have an input to it, until we get a chance to completely rewrite it, we don't want to know about it. There are a number of things in the Constitution that need to be removed and need to be amended. For example, one of the things that needs to be removed from the Commonwealth Constitution is reference to this slag they call the Queen of Australia. I hate the bitch. She isn't the Queen of Australia. She never will be the Queen of Australia. She's not even the Queen of England, for fuck's sake. This woman, pardon me, but this woman who has been committing this monumental fraud for so long it's not funny. Does anybody know the story about why she's not the Queen of Australia, Queen of England? Michael Hastings. Now, Michael Hastings comes down the line from Edward IV, and he could technically be claimed to be the King of England. But the problem is, it wouldn't matter if he was the King of England, because on the 8th of June 1383, King Richard II, whilst in the company of the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, Adam Horton, signed over all of the lands and the pertinences thereto in the Kingdom of England, and which then became part of the United Kingdom, to the King of Wales. And the King of Wales, whose office is the Lord High Constable of Hayden Palace, Pembrokeshire, Wales, is the King over the United Kingdom and the lands thereof. The Queen is what's called the Lord High Admiral. She only has a jurisdiction over the ships and the seas. That, by the way, is why the covering clause 5 of the Constitution states that you have to go back to the Admiralty Offences Colonial Act 1859, UK, which states that any offence committed within the colonies has to be tried and adjudged as though it were committed on board Her Majesty's ship, which is why they used to build the old courthouses in a yard as a boat in a dry dock, and when you went into the court, you went into the well of the court, and the Admiral sat up on his high deck, and then his officers on the deck below him, and all the business was conducted in the well of the court, which is why when they come to inspect your vessel or question your vessel, they put you in the dock. It all has to do with Admiralty. That's another story. The flag of England, St George Cross. I don't know how many people know that the flag of England is actually a combination of 2 or 3 Hebrew flags. And that Queen Elizabeth is, in fact, 144th generation from King David in the Bible. But the reason that she's not the Queen of England, and I'll give you the short version of this. About 5,500 years ago, there were 2 brothers born. They were twins, Farah and Zaraz. When they were born, one of the brothers put his hand out of the womb and the midwife tied a red string around his wrist. And he pulled his hand back in, and the other brother was born first. He got the birthright. In the Bible, it says that there will be two king lines, the 2 lines of the kings. One would be the green tree, one would be the brown tree, it states. The green tree refers to the cedar of Lebanon, which is referred to as the royal house of Israel. Pardon me, the king's line. Now, this line went right the way down to Zedekiah when he was taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar into Babylon, hence the Boney M song, By the Rivers of Babylon, blah, 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 blah. His daughter Teotifi was taken by Jeremiah the prophet through Egypt to Ireland. There's coins minted and you can get stored. If you've got enough money, you can buy them. They show quite clearly Jeremiah the prophet, the stone of destiny being carried on the 2 staves as they went through Egypt to Ireland. The Bible says that the throne of David will be turned 3 times before the second coming of Christ. The stone of David is the pillar that Jacob laid his head on. If you know this Bible stories about how he dreamed about the staircase going up and down from heaven, that was the rock. It's called the stone of destiny. It's a 448-pound piece of Bethel porphyry found in only one place on the planet, which is a particular valley in Israel. That stone was moved from there to Ireland. When Teotifi arrived in Ireland with the throne, that was the first time it was turned. She married a gentleman by the name of Achida, spelled E-O-C-H-I-D-A. When she married him, that was the first time it was moved. If you have a look at the Ulster, the flag or the pennant for the city of Ulster to this day, it is a hand with a red string tied around the wrist, because Zara's mob went across to the Isles of the West, which are the British Isles. The second time the stone was moved, it was moved from Ulster to Edinburgh by Fergus the Great, and then from Edinburgh to London by James I. On Christmas Eve in 1950, the Stone of Destiny, the Westminster Abbey was broken into. The Stone of Destiny was stolen by 4 research students from Edinburgh University and their lecturer, a professor, and it was taken back to Scotland, but they replaced the Stone of Destiny with the Stone of Scone, which is a 336-pound piece of Scottish sandstone. Now, just the same as every other tribal culture, the United Kingdom tribe, when they conduct a ceremony, it has to be done with the appropriate instruments. If the right instruments are not used, the ceremony fails. When Queen Elizabeth sat on the Stone of Scone instead of the Stone of Destiny, the symbolic requirements of the ceremony were not complete and remain incomplete to this day, and she is not the Queen of England or the United Kingdom. But apart from that, according to the Act of Settlement 1701 and the Coronation Oath Act of 1689, the Queen isn't the Queen anyway. All she is an employee of the Parliament of the United Kingdom. She can be sacked at a moment's notice. There is no such thing as the royal family, and you've all been had, and the little brat that was just born is not ever going to be a king. Whether or not they like that, that's the facts. The line was broken when Queen Elizabeth failed to conduct the ceremony properly, or have the ceremony, her coronation oath, taken properly. But that's that one out of the road. Right. Right, that shows you what it means. That's how we see this act of recognition. We don't see the act of recognition as being anything other than a scam to wrestle away from us what it is that we already have. This thing about the Aboriginal flag, I get into a lot of strife with our people because I refuse to acknowledge this thing called the Aboriginal flag for 2 very good reasons. I'm not Aboriginal. I'm original. I'm not Indigenous. The word Indigenous coming from the Latin indigena, which means a naturalised citizen of the realm. I am not a citizen or a slave to the realm. The flag, this thing here, is owned by the Crown under the Flags Act 1953. They also own the Torres Strait Islander flag, which is an aside, but they do. Opposition leader Tony Abbott said that it was not It was not about changing the Constitution but completing it. This is a clear and precise admission from the opposition leader, or now the Prime Minister, of the nature of the push for a so-called constitutional recognition. He said that our challenge is to do now, in these times, what should have been done 200 or 100 years ago, to acknowledge Aboriginal people in our country's foundation document. Yeah, it's all well and good, but we know what it means, so it won't be happening. In saying to do now in these times what should have been done that long ago, Abbott is telling the truth. He is saddened that his beloved England didn't make slaves of us from day one. His admission is that of a clear recognition that the first attempt at usurping the sovereignty of the tribes by the UK or the Crown was not properly executed according to law. And it is essential that the Constitution as a social contract is all in order or watertight from their perspective. Article 19 of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which doesn't really hold much water, but it's an interesting little spiel, it states that states shall consult and cooperate in good faith, not try and pull bullshit cons like this, but act in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own respective institutions in order to obtain their free, prior and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. And when our elder went into the Parliament in South Australia and said, hang on, can we do this in good faith? Can you consult us before you do something that's going to affect us? He was treated like a criminal. So there's no intention to do what is honourable in relation to constitutional recognition, so the whole process died that day. They can push constitutional recognition all they want. We got drongos like Les Malazar, who is was the chairman of the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples, trying to state that he talks for us. The National Congress is a corporation registered to the Crown, owned by the Crown. It's theirs, not ours. Also, the fact that it says it's the National Congress of Australia's First People. We are not Australia's First Peoples. Okay? We are the tribes of this continent. Australians are our first immigrants. Okay? We've got to keep that in perspective. And it's not a smart-ass comment. It's not meant to offend. It's just a statement of fact. We are not first Australians. We were here long before the word Australia was even considered, before the first time it was ever spoken. We were here. We'd been here for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what, as a matter of fact, we recently, and that's what I forgot to give AB to put up here, we have been able to start exposing a site up in the northern area of New South Wales. This site has been hidden to the public and the government since 1939, but this site has been recognised now as the oldest temple site on the planet and has been recognised by authoritative people as dating from the Paleolithic era. So you want to talk about out of Africa? Mate, Africa come out of our arse. We didn't come out of Africa. There is nothing in Africa that's even close to that age, apart from the rocks. This out of Africa theory is a scam that's been pulled to try and take people's focus off the truth. We are the oldest people on this planet. The tribes from this continent are the oldest people on the planet. There is no question about it. Yeah, there's 7 strands in the mitochondrial DNA that identify where people come from. There's only one group of people on the planet that have all 7, and that's the tribes from here. The rest of it's got diluted as it went away. But this particular site, the interesting thing about this site is not just that the site exists. The interesting thing is that the site tells the story of what has happened in the stars. I wish I hadn't forgotten. I can show people later on here if they want, but what happened was in 1936, 1939, a farmer discovered this particular site. He heard a ceremony going on, so he went to the site and he then spoke to the local tribal people, and he then realised what the site was. He spoke to government officials. They came and they documented the site. They then came back and said, we want to destroy it. So what this farmer did was he got all the stones, he moved them off the mound, over the side of the hill, and then he pushed dirt over the top of them and then said, don't worry about it, I've done it myself. He's now 95, 96 years old, and last year, maybe the year before, he let us know about the site. He's also, at the time that he did this, he sat down with the law people of the tribe, and a book was written that details everything about every stone on the site, which way, before they moved the stones, they made pictures of the stones, which way the stones sat, where they sat on the mound, what their purpose was. And we're in the process now of uncovering those stones one at a time and putting them back on the mound and putting the site back the way it should be. When we went to do our first inspection on the site, pardon me, we got hold of the book that described everything, including the ceremony that was done by the law people on the mound. Kano came over as one of the lawmen. There was 4 others of us. We started doing the ceremony. The totem for the site, according to this book that was written, and it's a handwritten book, it's not a book that was published, it's all handwritten notes by Australia's, at the time, Australia's most eminent archaeologist, described that everything down to the fact that the totem, the tribal totem for the site, was a falcon. When we first started to do the ceremony, the book said that when the ceremony is conducted that certain things would happen, and one of them was that these birds would fly in and fly around the site. The site's effectively shaped like an infinity sign. Within 20, 30 seconds of us starting the ceremony and with the clapsticks, the first falcon came over the tops of the trees and down around and started circling over the top of us. By the time we'd got 3 to 5 minutes into the ceremony, we had 8 falcons. These falcons had come over the tops of the trees and down over the top of us. They come from all over the place, and they were that low over the top of us when they came in. We could hear the wind going. We could hear them going through the air. We could hear the wind in their feathers. They then circled and went up and then started doing a figure 8 or an infinity sign over the site. The purpose of the site, if you just bear with me for a second, I'll pull up the information on it. And there won't be a whole lot of information about this site available until such times as we can be sure that it's secure, for obvious reasons. Now, what Frederick Slatter in 1939, President of the Archaeological and Educational Research Society of Australia, made the following comment. He said, "This is the Stonehenge of Australia. The mound is the oldest form of temple in the world and dates back to the Paleolithic age with the advent of first man. It relates to the existence of first men on the earth, their history and their philosophy." What's also interesting is that we've now discovered 3 other sites, most definitely 3, possibly a 4th, but 3 other sites on this continent that are very similar, and there are a whole range of different shapes that are etched into the rocks, different symbols, and all of these symbols appear on all of the sites, and the rocks that are at this particular site in New South Wales, the rocks we know from the geological tests that were done previously in the late 30s, come from all over Australia. They're not from that area in New South Wales. They come from all over Australia. And we're in the process now working with the various mobs concerned where these other sites are to get those rocks tested on their lands. But it appears as though those rocks also come from all over Australia. And what they do is they tell the story of the stars, and the rock's size is determined by the size of the star that they represent, which is quite odd, given that here we have blackfellas who are looking out into the sky with the naked eye and were able to tell fairly closely approximate size of the stars that they were looking at. And those sizes are representative of the size of the rocks that are used on the mounds. The information on the rocks clearly prove that the first alphabet was concerned our language. There are a bunch of letters used. The only letters that are relevant to, or that we can't cross-check to the English language, for example, are the letters F, Q, S, X and Z. There's so much about this site, there's so much material here. Again, Indigenous tokenism. You want to talk about Indigenous tokenism? Okay. In relation to this R thing, you'll notice that whenever the government wants to do something, it'll wheel out the same bunch of scum. Okay? You'll notice they wheel out Warren Mundine. Warren Mundine's that thick he doesn't even know what his tribe's name is. He doesn't even know that the name he claims as his tribe's name was a fraud that was created in 1892 by Dr. John Fraser and L.E. Threlkeld, documented in Australian government printed documents. Okay, and these are the people that they're using to speak for us. They appointed the board of the National Congress of Australia's First Peoples. They didn't ask us who we thought would represent us. They appointed them, just like with ATSIC. A lot of you people would know about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC. We used to refer to it as Aboriginals talking shit in Canberra. Okay? Because what happened was, despite the fact that in those days, we could participate in the elections of the people who were representative on the regional councils and the board of commissioners of ATSIC. But the problem was, despite the fact that Section 44(1) of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission Act, despite the fact that said that the elected arm was to guide and instruct the administrative arm, that never happened. I was during the ATSIC years, I was a personal assistant to one of the ATSIC chairmen. And I don't know how many times I had arguments with the administrative staff because they thought that because they were public servants that they could do what they wanted, and despite the fact that certain budgets were put in place for housing, health and infrastructure by the elected people, they would send the money where they wanted to send it. And what they used to do, for example, was if they knew that the wet season was coming, for example, they released funds up into the northern part of Australia. Obviously you can't build in the wet season, particularly not out in remote places, because you can't get trucks full of building materials out there. So what would happen was that the money wouldn't be spent, the houses wouldn't be built, then the money would go back to consolidated revenue, and the following year they'd say, but hang on, you didn't spend that money, so obviously you don't need it. And this is the sort of stuff that was continually getting done with taxpayer money. I could tell you some horror stories about ATSIC, about what has happened with the billions, quite literally, the billions of dollars. I remember having to settle an argument in the Lismore regional office of ATSIC that had been raging for 3 days. There was no work done in the office because the staff were arguing about whether they were going to lease Falcons, Commodores or fucking Magners. This is serious. These are the people who are supposed to be administering to the tribes the funding and the government programs for the tribe's benefit, and they were arguing they would not do their work because they wanted to argue about what sort of cars they were going to lease for the office. And instead of just going out and leasing Hyundai XLs that were economical and cheap to run, they all wanted to drive around in Commodore Acclaims. They all wanted to drive around in Flash Falcons, you know. It's just craziness. But anyway, again, I go off. All right, that's how we see the recognition campaign. We see the leader of the opposition, the Prime Minister and the Queen, even the corgis, all sitting there all smiling, everything's happy, right up until it happens, and then the true colours are shown. I don't know where I got that photo of that slag, but it sort of fits. This is how we see, we see, that's how we see life before the Royal R. Free people with the right to do as we choose, to do no harm, to give thanks to the life of an animal that we take for our food, to conduct ourselves according to our law, to do what we felt was appropriate and proper as free people. But what we see after the Royal R God, fuck me. What we see after the Royal R is we see our people in chains. We see ourselves bound to a constitution that we had no input to. I'll ask you a question. How would you feel? Someone walks into your house, they tell you to go and sit in the corner, they kick the piss out of you day and night, they steal everything you got, they eat your food out of the fridge, and then when your food's gone and they bring their own food home and you go and pull a carrot out of the fridge to have a feed, they want to kill you for it. How would you feel? Because that's effectively what happened to us. The British arrived, They moved onto our lands, they shot all our kangaroos, they shot everything and destroyed everything that we used to use and eat and hunt. And then when we killed one of their cattle to survive, they'd kill 5 of our people. I don't know if people know this, but the last real major massacre that occurred on this continent happened up near Cairns less than 50 years ago. In 1967, they were still taking pictures of blackfellas with chains around their neck. But what's happened is they've kept all this away from the majority of Australians. They've kept all the truth. Righto, we're onto that. Righto. They've kept the vast majority of the truth away from Australians so they could create this warm and fuzzy false history, so that if we ever stood up and said, hang on, no, we don't want to be a part of this, we seem to be ungrateful and unthankful. And just another thing, does anybody know why at this point in time Australia seems hell-bent on encroaching on the sovereignty of Indonesia?
Money.
No. No, well, it has to do with the oil and gas. I'll tell you why. We exposed this in... Is Flano here? In 2010. It's a shame because he could verify this. We exposed this in 2010. We got a whisper from someone that Kopassus troops were about to be landed on Australian soil. Does anyone know what Kopassus, the Indonesian Marines, basically? We're going to be landed on Australian soil and they're going to start slaughtering blackfellas up in the top end. Now, it's the same reason then as now, but I'll get to the reason in a second. What's going on with the incursions into Indonesian sovereign waters and space has got nothing to do with refugees. It's the old smoke and mirrors thing again. What's going on is that they're trying to incite Indonesia, with Australia's assistance, to bring troops to Australia, Indonesian troops to Australia, so they can start slaughtering the blackfellas up around the northwestern part of Australia. Because once the blackfellas are gone, there's no sovereigns on the country. Under the doctrine of abandoned domicile, there's no one there to hold the land, so the Australian and American troops that have been building up in Darwin for the last few years will go in and send the Kopassus troops back across the water, and then, oh, well, we'll just have to be thankful, won't we? We'll just have to participate in your constitution. We'll just have to participate in your society, because if it wasn't for you guys, we'd all be dead. That's what it's all about. It was the same reason they tried to do it in 2010, 2009, 2010. There's always more to it than what's on the surface. This particular document that's up here now, as you can see, it has to do with a statement by Governor McMurturie, and there's one interesting word in there. All Aborigines from Sydney onwards are to be made prisoners of war, and if they resist, they are to be shot and their bodies hung from trees in the most conspicuous places near where they fell, so as to strike terror into the hearts of the surviving natives. This is an admission by the Crown that they used terrorist activities against a peaceful people. The fact that they have never rescinded this instruction, as a matter of fact, Governor Burke actually made a proclamation that his people were to go out and strike what was called a universal terror into the hearts of the tribes so that they wouldn't interfere with the settlers. The reason for that was because the settlers knew that they weren't allowed to take our land, so the effect, what they wanted was an effect where every time we saw them, we'd bolt. We'd abandon our domicile, we'd leave our lands for them because, well, no point fighting them, they've got these things that shoot bullets. But as you can see from here, the Crown knows all about terrorism because it's been using terrorism as an action to gain its way for hundreds and hundreds of years. Are these slides, mate? Oh, look out. This is the Order in Council by Queen Victoria. All dealings with the Aboriginals for their lands must be conducted on the same principles of sincerity, justice and good faith, as must govern your transactions with them for the recognition of Her Majesty's sovereignty in the lands. Can you see they still haven't got recognition of her sovereignty? Because they're still trying to go through this act of recognition. So someone's bullshitting to someone. Someone's telling Australians that you've got sovereignty. Well, your sovereignty is not recognised by the tribes. And there's a silly old thing called a maxim of law. And one of those maxims of law states that he who has he whose claim is first in time is best at law. Now, until such times as the Crown can show us how it got here first, until such times as we agree to be recognised in the Constitution and acquiesce our sovereignty, we remain the sovereigns. And you can do one of two things. You can either remain a slave, or you can treaty with your local tribe, and you can, in your tribe, the tribes are now forming, or have formed, this thing called the Original Sovereign Tribal Federation. It's not registered with the Crown, it's with ourselves. We hold all ownership to it. If you treaty with your local tribe, you will be able to stand in that security, away from the Crown. The only thing that the Crown or the Commonwealth has here is bums on seats. Now, as 2% of the population, we have got Buckleys of getting rid of this Crown, this thing that is draining the life from all of us, turning us into slaves, stealing our children. And if you don't think you're a slave, you think you're not a slave and that your children are yours, maybe you'd like to tell me how it is that DOCS or Child Protection Services, how they can come and steal your children. Because if they're yours, that's kidnapping, yeah? But they can't be yours because the legislation that governs you as a slave says that they belong to the government, and the government can do what they want with them, which is generally feed them to the pedophiles. We actually did a case in New South Wales a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. There was 8 children taken, and this is interesting statistics just from one family. There were 8 children taken by DOCS. It took us 8 months to get the children back, from the day they were taken till the day they come back. During that period, 2 of the children were sexually assaulted. During the period, 1 of the children had broken bones. And the list goes on. There was I can't go too deep into it, and I can't mention names because at this point in time the parents are suing DOCS. But you'll get to see all about this one, because when it hits the fan on that one, it's going to cause big problems in New South Wales. And it also says, nor is this all. We must not be permitted to enter into any contract in which they might be the ignorant and unintentional authors of injury to themselves. You will not, for example, purchase from them territories, the retention of which by them would be essential or highly conducive for their own comfort, safety or subsistence. The acquisition of land by the Crown for the future settlement of British subjects must be confined to such districts as the natives can alienate without distress or serious inconvenience to themselves. To secure the observance of this rule will be one of the first duties of the official protector. Now, isn't it funny that they were talking about 2 different people there? They were talking about the British subjects and the tribes. So obviously the tribes weren't British subjects. And obviously, at this point in time, which was 1844, Her Majesty's sovereignty hadn't been recognised here. Now, I had this same academic that was chewing on me about the Pacific Island Protection Act, tried to tell me that Australia wasn't part of the Pacific Islands. Well, when I went to school, I was taught to believe that Australia was the largest island continent on the planet, and it sits in the Pacific, and it is a Pacific island. You could probably say that it's an Indian Ocean island as well, but it's not seen that way. According to all understanding on the subject, Australia sits in the Pacific because that's where all British settlements started. It was in the Pacific Rim, on this continent. Next one. Now, another one of the things that the Crown likes to use, or was banding around, was this word called, was reconciliation. Is that it? Hang on, where is it? Hey, look out. Reconciliation. This is the, gee, that's echoey. Keep it up. Dissimulation toleratura injuria. Injury is wiped out by reconciliation. Has anyone noticed how the reconciliation movement sort of died in the arse? When we exposed this in 2010, we came out, we let them go so far down the track, and then we came out and said, well, this is what you're trying to do with reconciliation. You're not trying to reconcile, all you're trying to do is wipe the debt. You've got to remember John Howard was a solicitor, okay? So when he was speaking in legal terms. The reconciliation wasn't about reconciliation here. There's reconciliation here. The Crown just didn't want to pay the debt for what they've done. The reason they don't want to pay the debt is because there are repatriation accounts that are sitting with money in them, and we're talking in excess of $10 trillion now. That money's been set aside for the tribes in the Pacific area for the damage that's been done by the Crown. There's a process that needs to go through to access those funds, but those funds will not be being accessed until such times as we get recognition of the ownership of the land here by all and sundry. And then instead of taking that as compensation for the loss of the lands, we'll be taking the money as compensation for the damage to the lands. Okay? So we'll not only get the cake, we'll get to eat it too. And that money will then come back into our economy and be rolled over in this economy for everyone's benefit. Everything that I'm talking about here is not for our benefit as blackfellas. It's for everybody's benefit. Okay? Because we don't sit on this continent. We don't sit on this continent isolated from everyone else. We are part of a society, not the Crown's, but a society, and we see it this way. We as 2%, 2.5%, cannot beat the 1%. Okay? You guys can't beat the 1% unless you stand with us. Because effectively we've got a bit of a timeline. If we can grab you guys and take you back with us to 5 seconds in time in law before the Crown stuck that rag in the ground at Sydney Cove, then we are all under tribal sovereignty, tribal law. And that means that the Crown doesn't have a foothold. One of the things that we are proposing is that at the appropriate time we're going to remove the Queen, the Governor-General and the Federal Senate. Our intention is to replace the Federal Senate with another body, which you can call it a Senate if you want, but that body will be made up of a male and female, or a lawman and a lawwoman from each of the tribes, and they will effectively be a sovereign Senate. From that we will elect a male and a female representing men's and women's law to be the heads of state. So far as everyone else having a vote and being fair and equal, the House of Representatives will be exactly that. Political parties will be made illegal, as they are now, but people just don't know that. And in accord with the Criminal Code, or the Crimes Act 1914, Section 28, anybody who interferes with another person's political liberty is guilty of a crime. At this point in time, the penalty is 3 years imprisonment. Raise that to about 10. Then what we do is, everybody who colludes with another member of Parliament to influence a vote in the House will get that 10 years for breaching the political liberty of their constituents. Every member will be a representative of their constituents, not a representative of a political party. Every time the caucus influenced the way the Labor Party voted in the Parliament, they were committing a breach of Section 28 of the Crimes Act, because they were interfering with the political liberty of the constituents of each one of those members that they influenced. Everything is basically in place. The Constitution itself is a failed document. It doesn't hold any authority because it's not being properly executed and exercised. If it is, then it's not so bad. We don't want to see anarchy in the streets. We don't want to see a collapse of the society as such. We just want to see two things which are vitally important to a proper government, and that is equity amongst all the people and integrity in governance. It's as simple as that. The same way it was with us. We used to sit in circle. The people who sit in circle, yeah, they're law people. They have a different rank, if you want a way of saying it, in the community. But the fact is, those law people could not move left or right on the law by themselves. They got moved by the tribe. Okay? If the tribe wanted to move things a particular way, the tribe did it. They just made sure that it was done. And the problem that we've got in our parliamentarians is we've got dipshits calling themselves leaders. Now, if I was an Australian citizen, if I was subject to their laws, I'd be saying something like this: Tony Abbott is not my leader. Tony Abbott isn't even a leader. All right? Tony Abbott is a pawn. If anyone thinks that Tony Abbott's running the parliament, you ain't got your head screwed on. It's like John Howard. John Howard wasn't running the parliament. There were a few people behind him. most notably Arthur Sinner-Dennis. And if anybody knows much about Arthur Sinner-Dennis, they'll know that he was the brains behind the economy for the whole period that John Howard was Prime Minister. He was John Howard's Chief of Staff up until the 16th of December 2006. When he left John Howard's employment, a few months later, John Howard got rolled out of office after 10 years with this guy at the helm. It's not the guy wearing the hat that's got the brains, because it's a dunce's hat. Okay? Next one. The saving of the rights of the tribes. As you can see, they were not allowed to extend or construe to extend sovereignty here and into the Pacific Islands. Where it says other places in the Act, it's referring to the Pacific Islands, and the other places are the Australasian colonies. I'll just go through, there's some of the words, these are out of Black's Law. As you can see where native comes from, tradition or traditio, Latin in the civil law, the delivery or transfer of possession, a derivative mode of acquiring, blah, 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 blah. Hence the word tradition. In the Latin civil law, delivery or the transfer of possession or a derivative mode of acquiring. Oh, hang on. There we go. There you go. The tradition or delivery. The tradition or delivery. It's funny how we've been taught to use words one way and they use words another. Okay? Now, this one here, I sort of take to heart. Teaching young Aboriginals that Captain Cook discovered Australia and that there isn't room in the country for them is not going to stop them from committing suicide. So the government can say all it wants about closing the gap and all the rest of the crap, but until they start to do what's right, this is going to continue for our people. Questions?
We'll go through the...
Oh, sorry. Yep. Now, the skin. This here... I'm all over the place today. Must have been there wrong last night. This is our treaty skin. On this skin, and I've also got our law stick or law mace. Our law mace. This skin tells the story of all the tribes coming together to form the federation, to sit in circle, to reassert our law. It's been signed and what's called sweated by all our senior law people. Sorry? All of our senior law people. And to sweat something is this. You'll see, you've probably seen this before, but you'll know what it is now. When you see blackfellas go like that, and they wipe it on someone like that, it's a mark of respect, because we're giving them ourselves. Yeah, we're giving them part of what we are, what's come from us. The same with the skin, the same with the law stick. I don't know if you know much about tribal iconography, but the little hoops, they represent someone sitting on the ground. You know, if you sit on sand and you get up, that's what it looks like. Our language, to a large degree, is written in these symbols. And this tells a story about all tribes coming together. If you want to come up afterwards, I can show you this and go through it. I've got a couple of other instruments that I wasn't allowed to bring due to law, because women are not allowed to look at certain things, and certain things are not allowed to be shown outside certain circles. But this stick here has got men's and women's heads for the men's and women's law. It shows the various tribes with the water law for saltwater and freshwater law, for the mountains and the valleys and the hills and the flats. And it also depicts the tribes coming together. You'll see the lines joined together where the tribes are walking, coming together. And along this edge here, on the other side here, it shows a bunch of people sitting in line with each other, being equal, sitting at one line, at one law, in one place. That's what that represents. And the feathers on the top are cockatoo and eagle feathers that represent our law. The only other feathers, bird that represents law, ultimately for us, is the crow. The crows are seen to be very special to us.
And the age of this?
The age of that skin, we've got 3 of those skins. They were taken off, quite oddly, they were taken off the kangaroos in about 1893, 1892. And the skins predate federation. And under our law, because the skin was taken off the animal at that time, that's where the intent lies at that time. That treaty predates federation. So they want to hang on to their constitution. That's more valuable than their constitution. That stick is more valuable than their constitution. I've got a couple of other instruments that predate federation by several hundred years. One of them predates, according to Christie's, it predates federation by about 2,000 years. Thanks, mate. Yeah. What was the other thing?
So we'll just finish up. I'll just get going to give you some anecdotal,
Yeah.
which he does best, by the way.
I tell you, I just something I wrote down earlier, getting back to the Vlad laws. I noticed it was interesting that before Schoolies Week this year, the police were coming out and saying, we've got rid of the bikies, there'll be no drugs on the Gold Coast. And then a week later, I couldn't believe this, a week later they come out and they say, oh listen, if you're a schoolie and you OD on the Gold Coast, what we're going to do is we're not going to ask you where you got your drugs from, we're just going to make sure you get treated. So it's all good. I thought they said there was going to be no drugs. All the bikies had left town, there was none. It's called recycling.
It is. Whilst you roll that up. So obviously something that's really where we're going with OSTF, because that gives you a really fantastic structure of the strategy behind what OSTF is trying to achieve. And we'll come back after, I think we're having a quick break, Mark, I think. But we're going to come back and talk about really where that fits for you, because it's fantastic to sit there and listen to it, and we all agree. You might not all agree, but you understand the rationale behind it. So how that actually relates to us is things like mortgages. So if you treaty with the tribe, this is how we get rid of the mortgage. And then things like the plates, which I'll get on to just touch on now really quickly for OSTF plates, about not having to register your car and run with them.
We have to do the mortgage stuff now, because when we come back, Ben's going to come in, because then we've got to be out.
Okay.
So just do the mortgage stuff now.
Sure. Okay. So we can do it really quickly, but you kick off on the plates and then I'll just...
Well, effectively it works like this. OSTF issued a number of sets of plates in 2010. People had got them. We had a fair idea that people would be able to argue for themselves in court, which was important because barristers and solicitors won't argue this stuff. Ultimately, what happened was that one of the guys who had the plates went to court. He got pulled over by the police. They took the plates. He ended up in court. The argument was that the plates were issued by the original Sovereign Tribal Federation under treaty with the local tribe here. The magistrate effectively took the view that, given that the High Court had stated that they were unable to determine the sovereignty of the tribes because they could not look behind their constitution, that the magistrate himself could not determine the matter of the issue of the sovereignty of the tribes, and therefore could not say that the tribes didn't have a right as sovereigns to issue the number plates. Was that, did you get that? Yeah. At the...
From that, so the recognition of when
yeah.
when the Aboriginal law was actually recognised.
Well, I had my own plates on my car, and I had no worries getting insurance from NRMA in New South Wales. They knew exactly what I was doing, and they insured the vehicle. Yeah, third party. Yeah, third party. Yeah. Yeah, third party. I don't know what you call it down here. Up home we call it comprehensive third party or CTP.
The OSTF plates were given back by the judge. In fact, am I correct in saying that the police had to screw them back onto the car?
No, what happened was if I pull me up on this if I'm wrong, I think you'd know. What happened was that the police came back around and handed the plates over. They sent a young girl officer around and said, "Here's your plates." It wasn't me. And you know, the guys had ongoing issues with the police since. They've tried a number of times to corner him, but they haven't been able to. And we understand that, like, we don't. I'm not for a second saying to people, "Here, just go and do this," because unless it's like stepping into a ring with Muhammad Ali. If you don't know how to fight, you're going to get fucking minced. All right? It's as simple as that. And this is the same sort of thing. You step into the ring with these guys and you don't know how to fight, you're going to get minced. Okay? I'm not telling anyone to do anything that I wouldn't do myself, but what I'm saying is don't do it until you know the argument. You can't fight what you don't know. It's the first rule of law. You can't fight what you don't know. But I will finish up in a second. But there's one thing that I did want to read to everyone here today, and this is the preamble to the document that we served on the Federal Parliament. So if I can just read this.
Sure.
All right? To all and singular to whom these presents shall come. We the autochthonous. Does everybody know what the word autochthonous means? Autochthonous means from the ground or from the very place. We're not indigenous, we are autochthonous. We are from this ground. This is where we're from. Okay? We, the autochthonous and original tribal peoples of the Great Southern Land, the noble peoples of the Great Southern Land known in this modern era as Australia, support and address the United Nations in that we solemnly proclaim the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a standard, a base standard of achievement to be pursued in a spirit of partnership, truth and mutual respect. Therefore, in this same spirit of pursuit, we adhered to this proclamation and have so adopted the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a template to claim and declare our sovereignty and nationhood and all the rights and privileges afforded to nations both within the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and according to our sovereign tribal status to the world. We, the original tribes of this continent, declare to the world that no matter our geography, tribe, faith or political affiliation, we are united as one people through the Almighty, the Creator of all things. The Creator confirms our brotherhood and nationhood, and by the Creator's will and blessing we exist. Where are we? Terra Australis Incognita, or Terra Australis Incognita, which is Latin for the unknown land of the south, was a hypothesised continent and did not even appear on European maps until the 15th century. However, since time immemorial, for many millennia before it appeared on European maps, this continent has been the sovereign lands of the original tribes. Other names used to acknowledge our continent by various peoples over the times have been, I hate this word, Magallanica, the land of Magellan, or La Australis del Espíritu Santos in the Spanish, meaning the southern land of the Holy Spirit, and La Grande Isle of Java, which is French for the Great Island of Java. Terra Australis was one of the several names applied to the landmass of what is now known as the continent of Australia. In this declaration, we use the term Terra Australis for the sake of ease only, and for the sake of ease only in reference to this continent. We, the original tribes and sovereigns of Terra Australis, we are the original tribes and sovereigns of Terra Australis, and we hereby declare that we have exercised and are exercising our right to self-determination, having united as a people to create the original sovereign tribal federation so as to unify the original tribal peoples under the authority and blessing of the Creator commensurate with our law. We wish to be known as the autochthonous tribes of the originals, or by the short name of the originals. Originals defining the unified, joint and several autochthonous original tribes, peoples, principalities and provinces of Terra Australis in the geographic region being the land mass that lies in the southern hemisphere of this, our Mother Earth, between the Pacific Ocean to the east, to the Indian Ocean and to the west, the Great Southern Ocean to the south, and the Timor and Arafura Seas to the north, and including the islands around the continent to a 200-mile limit to sea. We, the autochthonous original tribal peoples, are the original tribal peoples which are, by way of common treaty between ourselves, the member tribes of the original sovereign tribal federation. Origine and original are terms meaning an autochthonous creation of the Creator and giver of life, but in particular respect of this declaration, these terms mean the flesh and blood sovereign original tribal men, women and or children, being from historical and geographical Terra Australis, which are party to the OSTF treaty. We, the indigenous tribes of Terra Australis, confirm that we are the most ancient autochthonous peoples on this, our Mother Earth, and that our contribution into the development of humanity is unique, as is our contribution to and the maintenance of the most ancient tribal culture, songs, dance and ceremonies, and the oldest surviving system of law on the planet. The history of our people can be traced from the birth of time itself on the lands of Terra Australis, the material evidence of which can be found all over the original tribal people's territories. The tribal culture and law of this continent are worthy of, and a number have attained, World Heritage recognition. It is our belief that our people, our ethnic and tribal customs, our rituals, culture, law and languages have emerged throughout these territories in the past tens of millennia, and certainly long before legal history and beyond legal memory. Terra Australis, the autochthonous and historical homeland territories of the original tribal peoples, is the continent referred to in modern times by the term Australia. The most ancient ethnogenetic sources of the original tribes are to be found today in the tribal populations and within the original archaeological culture of the continent. Throughout the millennia, the original tribes have lived and loved across the continent, visited irregularly by representatives of the various European and other cultures of the planet, with which we conducted commerce under our own terms and laws as the sovereign tribes we were and remain. Man's ancient customs state that flesh and blood man was divided by the Creator into nations and tongues. The original nations, a creation of the Almighty Creator, were crowned by the hand of the Creator and granted ownership and custodianship over Terra Australis by him. Proof of this dignity is the acknowledgement by all the nations of the planet that we are the unquestionable first and autochthonous nations of this continent. We, the original tribes by divine right, are the Creator's assigned owners and legal guardians of this continent and have been since time immemorial, autochthony being our holy mandate, the divine testament of our inheritance, the confirmation of our royal rule of this, the Creator's land, Terra Australis. By the Creator's will, we were created the sovereign autochthonous peoples of Terra Australis with unlimited and inalienable and unassailable rights and freedoms as a peoples and as a nation, and with sovereign authority over ourselves and our lands. We have suffered cruel turns of fate. Our tribes have known peace for many, many millennia. This was until the arrival of the British on Darug tribal lands in 1788 at the place now commonly referred to as Sydney Cove. Since that time, the British have attempted to usurp our sovereignty. They have unlawfully occupied our lands and, with neither consent nor authority, have stolen and interrupted our natural wealth, our sacred sites, our culture, our families, and other matters and sites of significance to us. They have done so despite our making it clear to them that this is done against our will, our law, and our culture. They have done so despite being merely guests upon original tribal lands and in the process have committed ethnic cleansing of some of our fellow tribes. The Crown's parliaments have attempted to illegally disperse and dispossess our peoples across the continent in a vain attempt to displace us from our domiciles upon the tribal lands in an attempt to justify their fraudulent usurpation of our absolute title and sovereignty over our lands, ourselves, and our Creator-granted status upon this continent. We have been pushed out by force from our own lands, and over time, the records of our existence are being gradually eliminated and destroyed in a systematic campaign of genocide and ethnic cleansing. The settlers' parliaments have been waging a war of ethnic cleansing and genocide against the tribes since their arrival on our lands. Our graves are robbed, destroyed by bulldozers, concreted over and flooded with water. Our relics, sacred and holy sites, our bones and artefacts have been looted, stolen and illegally hidden in collections abroad and in foreign museums, and worse, in the homes of private settlers as monuments to the cunning craftiness of their destroying the Creator's longest-serving line of humanity and law. A surviving line, sorry. Our people are facing extinction, our tribes are dying out, and our languages are losing their speech. We are the people who are losing our identity, our names, our voice, and our nationhood, but we haven't lost them yet. In light of this tragedy, we have gathered together from around the continent in order to remind and confirm to the international community of nations and the people of the world in general of our existence, and to demand and claim our nationhood and sovereignty as the autochthonous sovereign peoples seeking peace, reconciliation, treaty, recompense and freedom from the oppression of the Crown and its greedy corporate warlords. Our people are incarcerated at horrifically disparate rates for either no legitimate reason or for disobeying the statutes of a Crown which has no right to rule over us as sovereigns. We have taken our future into our own hands. We have placed our feet firmly back on the path to self-determination as one autochthonous original collective and determined our way forward. Accordingly, we respectfully demand that the UN, the EU, Russia, the United Nations, the United States of America, the United Kingdom and Australia in particular, and the international community of nations as a whole, uphold and defend the rights that are entitled to us under not only our law, but also the various instruments including but not limited to the United Nations Charter of Human Rights, the Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and all other international laws, covenants, mandates, declarations and treaties which support and respect the sovereignty and rights of the Indigenous peoples, nations and human rights including, but not limited to, our right to assert and establish our own sovereign and independent states as is recognised by the international community in accord with, amongst other things, UN Resolution 2625/25.
So can we jump in there?
That's
so
it.
We have to,
Yep.
but I want to just touch on that because what's really important is that recognition by the UN or any of the other foreign bodies actually then establishes, if you like, I guess it's an international recognition of the original people of this land. And when that happens, there's a couple of steps that have got to happen. One, OSTF is having a gathering of the tribes at Uluru in April.
Yeah.
So that's a really important thing to get as many members as at every tribe, as many people at Uluru for a massive corroboree to actually set forward the charter, I guess, for want of a better term, to go over to the UN again?
First of all, as a courtesy, we're going to give the High Court in London the opportunity to issue writs of mandamus and certiorari, effectively to tell the Parliaments of Australia that they cannot use the copywritten statutes of the United Kingdom here as law. We don't hold much hope. It's not that we don't hold much hope. We know that there are limitations on whether we can get that up. So we're also intending at the same time to take England to the European Union courts, which now own all British law, whenever it was created, including the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia and everything else. And we're going to get the EU to issue the writs that we need to tell England, to tell Australia to piss off. And by Australia, again, I don't mean the people, I mean this corporate governance structure that's over the top of us. I don't know how clear I can make it. Our position is that we want you people to stand with us, because you can't free yourselves from the Crown and we can't do it by ourselves.
So the 2% of the original that makes up our population, they can't fund or afford to do this. So what we need to do, we need to get OSTF funded, even you know, some startup funds initially, I guess, to get to Uluru to do that. We've asked everybody who listens or who wants to be involved to actually donate. You can do that via the philanthropy page on Freedom Summits. And what that does, it gets the, for want of a better term, the charter or the direction set. They go over and do what they're going to do overseas. When they come back here and they are recognised, two things. One, you have the ability to treaty with your tribe and to essentially give up your citizenship or have dual citizenship of Australia. And then you can tackle things like plates or registration and all those sorts of things. And the operational things about insurance and stuff will be worked out, I'm sure, over time. It's pioneering stuff. There is no set way we're going to do this. What we are going to do, though, via in particular Jerry and Jerry's groups, and it's a shame he couldn't make it, but he will, you will catch up on this information on the webinar, is we're going to set up action groups to tackle certain areas. So one of the ones is the Banking and Integrity Commission is going to be set up, and we want you to all join that, okay? So what happens if you want to run that in your local area down here, and we're going to have them in all capital cities, all being run as, I guess, essentially independently, but as a collective as well, with Jerry's direction, because you can't use the double-edged sword of the law without someone who's going to get up and represent, unless you've got a few $100,000 to pay for a barrister. Then you've actually got to get them to the point where they actually would believe your argument, or at least put forward a reasonable case. Jerry's prepared to do that. Jerry will go into any court and argue anything, and we're literally talking to him at the moment about things such as, can we issue search warrants on Campbell Newman's office, and Jerry's ballsy enough to do it, backed up by Gunham. Things like the mortgages, how that relate to us sitting right here? Well, okay, that sounds fantastic. What it is that if you treaty with the tribe, you get the land, you give them the title, give them the RP data back. So we're planning on having a class action, again, for want of a better term. We would like to have 2,000 or 3,000 people who are prepared to actually enter a class action and challenge the mortgages with the banks the way that we're talking about it once they secede, if you like, from Australia and join OSTF. So it's available to every single person in the room. It's really important that we get them there. So it doesn't matter whether it's $1 or $10 or $100. We need to support them. And it's like any other charity on the philanthropy page. If someone's touched your, there's rung a bell with you today or yesterday, please just give what you can, because that's what's going to get these guys, pardon me, through the process that we're all going to benefit from. There's forms out the front that Jerry's got. I think we had 6 pages of names in Sydney, which was a smaller group than this, would you believe? But we just people interested who want to be on the mailing list and who want to do it. So if you can actually fill out the forms out the front, see Cherie or Simone, get all of it. It's just information on there, and then once you're recognised once you've established what area you want to be part of, what group you can be part of, many of them, then Jerry will contact you directly, and we'll go from there as far as setting them up and putting you in touch with the other groups around Australia, holding webinars and all those sorts of things. So I think everyone, thank you for Gunham. And
Just one thing. I just want to reiterate the point. This is not, apart from all the bullshit that John Howard tried to say, it's about taking the farms, it's not about taking anything. Okay? We realise that they're going to exterminate us. Okay? We realise that they're going to continue to enslave you. There's two options. We can get exterminated, you can be enslaved, or we can all be free. Simple as that.